Hey everybody, welcome to Mechanics and You. This is a primer on game mechanics and how we talk about them. My name is Jeremy Ledbetter. I am a software developer and escape room designer based out of Atlanta. And this is...
Well, I'm Stephen Rouse. I'm also a software developer based out of Atlanta, and sometimes I make video games.
My name is Taro Mia. I'm an independent game developer. Like to make a lot of experimental games and game jams.
Cool. We would love to know your names too, but there's far too many of you at this point. So,
But you're all beautiful people.
But we love you already.
Yeah, I'm happy
absolutely.
you came here.
Cool. So this panel is going to be more about a forum-style discussion about what mechanics are and the mechanics that we get excited about. So before we get started in diving into the meat of what a mechanic is, I just kind of want to start a conversation with you guys about some of the mechanics and games that you love. So if you'll take a second to really think about a game, maybe your all-time favorite game or one in recent memory that stands out to you as something that was particularly engaging or fun, and if you were comfortable, share with us maybe one of the prime experiences that made that fun for you. Sure.
I always like the Counter-Strike, and you're one of the terrorists, and you know they're coming.
Yeah.
Trying to find some little niche corner or something where they don't kill you the first time you're able to take them out.
Sure, yeah.
That was a great.
So the strategy of that is particularly fun. Go ahead.
Chivalry, medieval warfare.
Uh-huh. Okay. What about that? It was fun for you.
Pretty damn accurate.
Okay.
So,
were you there? No, I'm just kidding. I'm giving you a hard time. I said, were you there? You said it was pretty damn accurate. What about it made it accurate? I haven't played the game. That's why I'm curious. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You're right. That's really important, right?
You get you in the front here.
I was just like thinking about Dark Souls and like the progression in that game, and Dark Souls 1 specifically.
So the progression system.
Well, no, the progression of the level design, how it goes, like it'll go like up and up and up, and then come back down and connect back to the starting area, and like everything is like so interconnected. You can like walk around the whole world without looking if you want to, like pretty easily. Like there's a shortcut from basically everywhere to everywhere else. Until the second half of the game where they streamline it more because it's like endgame stuff and you're reaching dead ends. But like Dark Souls 1 has like so few dead ends. Like when you finish an area, like you can go back to the previous area like through a really clever shortcut. The first area, like the undead bird and undead parrot, you go up this like mountain through the aqueduct and like up to the top of the city, and then you can go down into like the sewers and the depths, and like there's an elevator that goes back down to the starting area, and like it blows your mind when that happens.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, so I just like did a big, like a huge circle, like.
God of
Awesome.
War does that a lot too.
No.
That's really cool. Yes, you're over in the middle. Oh, huh.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
That's a good
cool.
one.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, we're going to hold there because I'm sure all of you guys have really cool ideas, but we've gotten some really cool input there. So thank you. Sure.
I try to think of something, but I can think of features. I think that's an important distinction.
You're right, it is, and we're going to get into that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're about to.
Excellent. It's not going to a feature instead of mechanic.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
yeah.
Thank you for the distinction because
You
we're
cool.
actually
Yeah.
going to talk about that.
Yep.
So colloquially speaking, when we talk about game mechanics with each other, we tend to talk about dynamics of a game or systems within a game, like combat or exploration or traversal, these kind of things that form the experiences that we're used to. But for convenience, or actually not for convenience, but for kind of like academic scrutiny, let's try to dive a little bit deeper into what a mechanic actually is. So I'm going to read this very weighty, interesting blurb from the MDA Formal Approach to Game Design and Game Research, which if you haven't seen this paper, it's like 5 pages long. It's a short read. It's a really interesting way to delineate between what a mechanic is and what a system is, and then what a gameplay experience would be. I promise I won't patronize you by reading anything else from these slides, but I am going to quote this. Mechanics describe the particular components of the game at the level of data representation and algorithms afforded to the player within the game context. Together with the game's content, levels, assets, and so on, the mechanics support the overall gameplay dynamics. Which is basically saying, let's take your Counter-Strike example for you. You have like taking cover, aiming, reloading, and shooting, and that forms what we understand as gun-based combat, right? So going back to that, can we revisit some of the examples that you guys gave us, and let's break those down into the mechanics that form those experiences, starting with the Majora Mask idea. Would you mind kind of parsing that for us or with us to kind of understand like that auto jump? Actually, that is a mechanic of traversal, so it's already there. Thanks.
That's
Yeah.
already defined. I was about to say, there's not.
Thinking that, like, you forget that you don't have a jump button.
Right,
When I
right.
come back to the game, I go back into it, and I try to find the jump button again, and I was like, oh, wait, that's not here.
Sure.
Because I auto-jump when I go near a cliff.
So I guess in shorthand, like just a way of like I guess thinking of this, if it's a player's actions or if it's initiated by a player's actions, that can typically, like most 90% of the time, that's going to be a mechanic. It's some minute detail of action and reaction that happens and occurs because of something that's going on in the game.
Your example of the Dark Souls progression is a
realized
good.
mine was wrong, because I'm talking about level design.
Well, it's not
No,
wrong.
it's
Just
not wrong, yeah.
colloquially speaking, we kind of interchange the word mechanic for system and stuff. And one of the points we wanted to make is we kind of glean over these things out of convenience. But if we really want to drill down on what makes something successful or not successful, it behooves us to kind of reframe it as a mechanic is a discrete piece of a larger puzzle. You know.
Right.
But like you, go ahead.
I was also gonna argue that shortcuts is arguably a game mechanic in and of itself.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because like the
Yeah.
elevators,
Right.
like the doors that only open from one side.
So has anyone here seen the Game Maker's Toolkit on YouTube? All right, more people needs to see that. The
Yeah.
one video I personally recommend is the I think Mark Brown's is the YouTuber's name. He created a series of videos called Boss Keys, and the Wind Waker video in particular talks about shortcuts, and ironically in this case in the negative context. But I would recommend checking that out and see how that contrasts with Dark Souls as well, because obviously Dark Souls uses it well. There's not a question in my mind about that. Right, but so like I said, that's arguably a mechanic, and it does affect overall gameplay pretty significantly. Yes.
Would you repeat the name of the series?
Boss Keys or Game Maker's Toolkit. Game Maker's Toolkit is the one I personally recommend because that's a little more focused.
Do you have a question?
I just wanted to bring up the dodge roll in Dark Souls 3. And just the absolute perfect timing that they let you do it with. And then once you mastered that system, it's incredibly satisfying. And that Dark Souls 3 nailed it, I think. And that when you've made a mistake, you've run out of stamina, even the boss attacks are timed just right that if you have that precision, you can dodge roll right through their next attack. Use this invincibility crank, and it feels so good when you do it. You're like, oh my god, I just did terrible mistake.
And that's yeah.
And suddenly, just
Yeah,
everything
absolutely.
changed.
Yeah, yeah, because Dark Souls, as we all know, is punishing. That is the if that game has a theme, it's punishment. But you can bet that the people that developed it, they knew what they were doing with that. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, so you have to have extreme skill with this game. We're going to put one little thing in here that's going to basically, if you get it right, you're going to have a good time.
Yeah, and definitely, like, I do like the fact that almost everything in that game costs a resource. As you mentioned, a dodge roll taking up a stamina, like, that is a pretty brave decision in my opinion, but yeah.
The stamina system in Dark Souls is actually really interesting. Like, I've never seen anything in a similar game where, so like obviously attacking and dodging, you use your stamina. So your stamina recovers at like a normal speed when you're standing, and if you're holding up your shield, it recovers slowly. So if you want your stamina back, you have to drop your shield and give the enemy an opportunity to attack you. Like you have to back off, and then you can come back once you have your stamina back. Because when you have your shield up, your stamina doesn't come back very fast. Oh, and also getting hit, like taking hits with your shield also uses stamina. So you can only take so many hits before you have to drop your shield down. I
Yeah.
thought that was a really cool thing. I haven't seen stamina implemented like that in any other game.
That is a really good way of like balancing the strategy of reducing damage versus like regaining the ability to reduce damage.
Yeah, it's like you can only do so many attacks at once, or you
Sure. Yeah, that's cool. It keeps things going instead of you just standing there with your shield indefinitely.
It makes every decision that you make like all that more difficult and interesting as a
right.
consequence.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw that you had some input.
This might be jumping ahead a little bit, but if you take a game like Bayonetta,
Uh-huh.
where you have the dodge ability,
Oh.
and the whole purpose is dodging enemy attacks, and then you take the timing of that dodge to slow time, is that a combination of the two mechanics to create a system, or is that part of the dodge mechanic at work that creates the entire combat?
It sounds complimentary. I haven't played Bayonetta in years, but I imagine that that's probably part of the combat. Like it all kind of feeds into the combat system, and so like those particular mechanics probably are complementary in that regard. I would imagine. Does anybody else have anything to share?
Oh, there's,
I guess it's thought like the original Eve series,
Mhm.
in the sense how sound and shade kind of plays into overall gameplay.
Yeah.
How it affects how you play the game.
Right.
Just like you gotta strategize carefully how you're playing your routes and steal things and you're gonna kill people.
Right. Yeah.
Overall, that just really intensifies the game.
Definitely.
correct me if I'm wrong, but Thieves is a first-person game, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense then. Because like if you think about any other stealth game, you know, take Metal Gear Solid for example, where you can already see the character from a third-person perspective, like you know, you can afford a lot of more variables to be in there so that you can make the stealth more exhilarating, I guess. It's actually interesting then when you contrast that with to Thieves, where sound and visibility instead is the main form of stealth because already your vision is pre-obscured. So in a way, it's almost like it's compensating for. It's arguably a little easier game from a stealth perspective, but it's arguably compensating it for the fact that it's a first-person game.
Well, yeah, because it's like, well, with the sneaking game, Metal Gear Solid, like that's its main mechanic right there, or most of it. It's obviously because it's stealth. The reason why they switched to a third-person view, so it's just simply for the fact that you could actually see yourself and know where you are in relation to your environment.
And you can
Bless
see
you.
more than the character could see.
Well, yeah, typically.
Stuff behind you, you can see around the corners with the camera.
Sure.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. In first person, you can only you have your line of sight, you know.
Yeah.
Right. And how you calibrate those mechanics based on the third versus first person is very different.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
I think with third person, it's kind of like the approximation of peripheral vision. You
Yeah,
know?
that's exactly
and,
yeah.
And it's also, I know for me, I like playing third person stealth games because it affords me the ability to do it with badassery.
Yes.
You know, as opposed
Yes.
to like
It doesn't
when.
have to be realistic.
Right.
Right.
You
Like-
can see things that Snake wouldn't be able to see.
Exactly.
course.
I don't feel cool running around in Alien Isolation. I'm horrified, right? But those same kind of ideas of hiding and sneaking past things feel just as awesome in a game like, Metal Gear Solid or, something like that. Cool. Thank you. Anyone else? Sure.
Either.
If either
Either.
or, if you
Yeah.
if you have any follow-up questions or.
In the vein of non-combat mechanics,
Mhm.
one of the things that always strikes me as both the simplest and the simplest is, of course, Minecraft. Like,
Mm.
the only real new mechanic they added in that game was the ability to turn a block, like a little polygon onto the screen, into an item that you pick up. Like, first Minecraft was type preserved just making blocks disappear and then move there. They didn't have different kinds of blocks.
Mm.
How would you say that that affects gameplay today?
It's a very lofty question.
Yes, it is. But really, like, so what you're saying is the advent of the crafting system, the crafting mechanic in Minecraft, both like before
Well,
and
how it
after,
changes
like,
the world.
how it changes the world,
Because
yeah.
crafting and resource collection is a timeless game,
Yeah.
trope. But like Minecraft, I don't know if they were the first game to do this, but they were certainly one of the most modernly popular to basically change the world that you live in around you as you resource collect and then reallocate those resources.
Right, and they were the first ones to do it on such a massive
I
scale.
wonder. I wonder. Are there games out there now that use that primarily? Yeah.
They did
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it's totally unrelated. The only thing that I can come off of my head right now is is Planet Coaster's voxel-based terrain system, which is super cool. But it really did change the way you plan out your parks and stuff like that. But that's tangentially related at best.
Well, I think there's like actually, like Minecraft has had a huge influence on games as a whole, like it's mostly indie games where like you have so many, like I don't want to say imitators because that's diminutive and like some of them are legitimately really good games, but a lot of games have that like picking up and moving
Yeah,
terrain
right.
mechanics, like look at Terraria,
Sure.
or like Starbound, or like,
Well, I mean,
I
it.
wouldn't call them Minecraft clones, but a lot of games have used that mechanic.
Well, they like
jump off.
Well, yeah. Any first-person shooter that came after Doom for the longest time was called a Doom clone. It's just, ideas happen, and people like to reiterate upon ideas. There's the adage of there's no such thing as an original idea. All the original ideas, they're already out there. So it's like everything we're doing and everything we're saying is a remix of something that was said before.
I would argue, in a way, like being able to just take blocks from the world in and of itself isn't all that compelling, but to be able to then use said mechanic to create what you want to create, or for that matter, the fact that they added to that game mechanic the fact that you can sometimes reveal an entire dungeon right under your foot, like basically they took that fundamental control system and mechanic system and they asked the question, how can we expand on that? How can we make that more interesting? And that's what makes it such a compelling experience.
Yes.
Back with the Bloodborne / Dark Souls and stuff, the one thing that I think that Bloodborne really did well with the mechanic that pushed the game to a new level was the rally mechanic. So whenever you take damage in the game, you get part of it is like chip damage, this white damage, and then you have about a 1.5-second timer where if you hurt someone in that time, then you will start to refill your life. And that combined with the little other mechanics, like micro steps, like the little rolls, made aggression in combat a lot more rewarding. And then every system in that game relied on that. The enemies were faster, your dodges, you weren't fully dodging, you were just quick stepping. All of your weapons you didn't need to switch weapons, you just press a button and your weapon switched to mode. All of these,
Yeah, no shields either.
all these mechanics.
There's one shield and it's terrible. It's a joke.
Gotcha.
Interlaid, and that mechanic specifically changed the entire tone of every single other gameplay system in that type of game.
See, I haven't played that, but it sounds to me like the developers have given the players an opportunity to succeed or to accomplish something almost continuously, which is that's a powerful place to be at from a game developer point of view, because you've established this lore and a story and an experience, but then you're asking the player to participate actively, which seems to be a diminishing expectation in a lot of modern games these days. Maybe not a lot, but enough for it to be a problem. Yes.
I really love the series Bit Trip Runner.
I've never heard of that.
I am
Bit
in
Trip
love
Runner.
with the Bit Trip series myself, thank you.
I have it on my Steam queue.
It's part of what I find so addicting is throughout the level there's these red pluses that unlock new layers to what in my opinion is a fantastic soundtrack. But to unlock that last layer, usually the last plus is in a slightly more difficult position. And I think it really encourages player mastery and to take more risk taking. You can get through the level doing the bare minimum.
Sure.
But once you really get that mastery and picking up on the different keys in the level,
So you're using the music as a feedback reward.
Yeah.
Nice.
Game rewards you by making the music better.
And it's not enough to be good. It's like you actively want to be the
wanna hear
best.
it.
That's really
Right.
cool.
I will also say, just similar to actually a lot like Dark Souls in a sense, I'm going to give a plug for Bit Trip. That game series in general demands a lot of mastery, and it is fantastic. It's very deliberate game design.
Both of those things.
Yes.
hearing two different forms of the same thing, one thing I find really interesting, I saw this one Twitch player, he plays Super Meat Boy like all the time. He enjoys it so much. He plays it throughout the year, and then every year around Christmas, he always goes, "I want to be the boss." And he beats it for Christmas, and it's like his Christmas special. They're very similar games. They both are like platforming There's only one way to get through the level, and you cannot mess up.
You have to practice. It's almost like
Yeah.
it's almost like choreography.
It's an indie game that's like free to download.
Huh.
It is ridiculously hard.
Do you
Wait,
think so? The challenge, the engagement in that is the mastery of the level, not necessarily the tools at the player's disposal to traverse the level.
I just like how there's like these very similar games,
Yeah.
same genre, but two entirely different experiences.
I would be curious to see which one's more successful.
I was about to say that seems like yeah, Steam Meat Boy.
Probably financially successful because
Sure.
you can buy that one, whereas
Right.
I want to be the boss.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
So
Yeah,
so I guess once you've beaten the level, what's the replayability value on that? On
Just looking gay.
you never beat the level, yeah, just looking great.
You don't.
Yeah.
So
How many less deaths can you get?
Right.
okay,
Right.
good.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
no, that
okay.
is good.
Meat Boys to try to get a better time. Because like that's a really like speedrun oriented game. They reward you for better time.
And they reward you for dying.
Yeah. You had a question? Or-
Yeah, so in regard to Super Meat Boy on one end of the spectrum, and you have, what's the name of the other game?
I want to be the Bashi.
I want to be
On
the
other
Bashi.
end. And then spanning that whole spectrum, I don't know if this is true for all Mario games, but Super Mario Run,
Mm-hmm.
just been mashing through the past few days.
Mm.
The coin system where it's painted purple and black, the required for mastery ramps up with the coin. So when you first do the pink coin run, there are so many options to get every coin. But then the purple gets a little bit harder, and then black, you pretty much have to do pinpoint accurate jumps, and it's not like, oh, maybe I take the Goomba or the Koopa, or I jump
Yeah.
on the block. It's you have to do it this way. So you get this whole span of exploration to
Mastery.
puzzle solving,
Right.
basically.
Which is great. That kind of goes back to like continuous reward.
Yeah.
Like the player gets to kind of choose the gameplay style that they are wanting in that moment. That's really neat.
Really awesome, and it's really great because just talking about that game and what was it, Super Meat Boy and the other one, it's all in the same vein. It's all the same genre of frustration, and the fact that we have a genre that's based on that, all harkening back to NES difficulty style games where it's like, but instead these games actually have ends to them, so it's like that's the cool part.
to be fair, if memory serves correct with I Want to Be a Bashi, like that game has a lot of points where it just outright tricks you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Stuff like comes in off the screen.
Some of the spikes and the spikes come up with stacking.
Sure.
Right.
Is that the game
So-
where the moon comes alive and comes after you, or is that I Want to Be the Guy?
That's I want to be the guy.
Yeah, there we go.
Birds.
Okay.
That game's stupid. And it's like not even good mechanically. Like it's so like it's so haphazard, you know. But, like it's kind of amazing to like witness it, like witness someone's frustration with it.
Sure.
I would.
It has some classic like goof kills. Like there's a part where you go to Zelda 1, like it's just the Zelda world, and the old man's like, here, take this sword, and if you jump into it and try to take it, you just die. You just get killed by the sword because it's a spike.
Sure.
He's like, you just jumped into a sword, you idiot.
Right. It's almost more fun to watch someone fail at that.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, I would argue like a lot of those games are more comedy.
Oh.
They use those mechanics as a form of comedy rather
Yeah.
than as a form of, well, I mean, it's obviously artificial difficulty.
Right.
Whereas, Super Meat Boy is more focused on actually trying to give you the hope that you can actually pass through the game.
Well, yeah, 'cause you can see every obstacle every time. Like the whole level is on screen, you know. So like you can see everything.
I also want to
No
give
tricks.
I also want to give a call out to Shabon Action, also very well known as Cat Mario, which I'm sure many of you have in fact played. Like that entire game is predicated around you recognize what the first 3 levels of Super Mario Brothers is like, or first 2, excuse me. But like none of the humor works if you don't know those 2 things. It's just
Right.
like a really frustrating game otherwise.
It's like an inside joke.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah.
There's that classic YouTube video from like the mid 2000s. It's called Super Mario Frustration, and just this guy. Yeah, he's just like playing a Mario ROM hack, like a Mario 1 ROM hack, and it's like really hard, and he's just getting super mad. I feel like that was like the start of that kind of genre. People are like, oh, let's make these really stupid hard like Mario clones. And
Sure.
just make it fun because it's hard. But
Right.
watch people get mad.
That's
And it worked, and there's tons of games like that now.
nice. Yes.
Since we're kind of talking about that already, would you consider the concept of the Kaizo trap to be a mechanic, or is that something that's accomplished from the mechanics?
So Kaizo Trap uses pretty much all the Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario 64 mechanics to create the level of supreme difficulty
It's like
that
a
it
remake.
does. So yeah, it's not what I would argue mechanics per se, but how it combines them into the levels that it created.
So you would consider that an accomplishment rather than a mechanic per se?
I would argue that, but I don't know. What do the other panelists think in that regards?
I mean, from the sounds of it, yeah, it's like difficulty in game content, all this stuff. It's like that. It goes beyond just mechanics. Like mechanics are like, you know, some of the outset tools you have as a player, but then, you know, how your environment is arranged and how it can be done in relation to these mechanics. That's kind of like that's. So yeah, like in my terms, that sounds like it'd be more of a remix than anything, like of the same stuff, just to make it more, you know, difficult.
Now, to give a little more credit to that game, it did exploit a lot of glitches in the original Super Mario Brothers 64. That's where you know I would actually argue, yeah, that's a valid point to say. Whenever it uses those kind of things, that would be a mechanic. Because let's face it, Super Mario Brothers 64 clearly was designed not to take those glitches into account. So they didn't consider. So when the level designers made that game, they did not consider those glitches as part of the game, and that's completely valid. But Kaizo Mario, on the other hand, uses those glitches as the game. So so it's a completely fair point to say that it has its own unique mechanics that clearly Super Mario 64 didn't utilize. But then again, like you know, when a speedrunner reprograms a game to make it run Super Mario Brothers 1, the original, like, is that a mechanic? And you know, that's where things starts really stretching it for me as a game designer. I'm not really entirely sure I want to call that a mechanic.
Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to a quick little example of how you can change the underlying mechanics of a game that on the surface might seem like a really cool concept, and we've probably all experienced this in all of our own favorite franchises, that accidentally but ultimately undercuts the experience that we're seeking. So we're going to watch 2 short little videos.
What game is this?
This is Assassin's Creed Unity. What I want you guys to pay attention to is the parkour dynamics and how they play into the stealth/combat. I love that jump.
That's pretty
So
awesome.
cool.
He just goes, "Hey, you got something on your throat." I love that spin.
All right. Oh, this is not what I want.
Oh no, all of our secrets revealed.
All right, so now this is the next year's iteration, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Again, we just pay attention to how the parkour and traversal mechanics
Suddenly never matter now. Because, you know, the Industrial Revolution is known for its zip lines.
That's like super.
Sorry, but it feels like whoever designed this game was playing too much Arkham City.
I think so. Yeah.
It's like they forgot they were making an Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah. All right, so you get the idea, right? So we have a parkour system that's built out of the mechanics of running, jumping, scaling, and dropping, shimmying, etc. And that gives us this really interesting dynamic of running up and down buildings and jumping from roof to roof and being able to tackle people and then dive or run away, right?
Since the first game, that is the core component of an Assassin's Creed game.
Right. And then in Syndicate, we add the new ability to graph line and zip line, and it's not necessarily that those things aren't cool or fun. It's just they've undercut everything that's been established as parkour up to that point. So,
Because, I mean, looking at the setting, that looks like it could be an awesome game.
For
Like,
sure,
You're looking at it,
absolutely.
you're like, man, I want to play that game. But
and
then
the
they,
first time you zip line, it is cool, it is fun, but it just you totally removed the need to climb a wall or to run from roof to roof. So in that example, can anyone think of a way we might implement the mechanic of ziplining or grappling up to the roof without breaking the parkour? I saw your hand first, and we will work our way backward.
You can do limited use, you do contextual, only certain buildings, only fit across like certain impasses.
Sure.
Absolutely.
That's the-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That core component of a mechanic is like you can't do everything all the time.
Right.
So it's like a matter of limiting that so that a player has to use their own devices to, figure out when and where to use it. So
Yes,
who's
sir, you're
next?
right here.
Okay, so, the same solution, two different approaches. I
Oh.
would make it so that you unlock the grapple points, or you unlock the hook shots later in the game.
Okay.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
that
like
is
that
interesting.
idea.
Yeah,
That's
so
good.
you have to use those mechanics before you earn the new ability to traverse. I think that is definitely an approach. And a good
Who's
one.
next?
I saw so many hands. We'll just
Yeah,
go
no.
back to you, sir.
I don't think Unity was the first time they used the grapple in Assassin's Creed.
Uh-huh.
It was actually first used in Brotherhood, Brotherhood or maybe Revelations, one of those two.
I think you're thinking of the hook blade.
Yeah, Hook Blade.
There's a hook
It's more like the Hook Blade.
and the blade. Yeah. And so that extended the reach, but it ultimately didn't negate you still had to climb with it, right? Like, so it was incremental as opposed to this kind of macro traversal that they've added. But you're right, it is. I mean, like, they have played with different ideas of parkour, but I think the difference between that example and this is that that didn't necessarily break the pillar of gameplay of parkour. Yes, sir.
I think maybe just, you could definitely just keep in there, just make it more interesting. Make things happen while they're out there. Or maybe grappling, just have more elements to it instead of just being back from point A to
Yeah.
point B. It could be a level design choice almost. And you could put things closer, you're grappling from short distances and
Sure.
interesting things in between.
See, and I think that that's probably what this was born out of. I'm a shameless Assassin's Creed fan, which is why I reuse this example. And in the world of London that they built, they had to make the roads much wider than normal to fit their carriage game or the system within it. And so suddenly all the buildings were too far apart to jump to and from. So it makes sense that they would have to remedy this like constant up and down that you would have to do if they didn't implement something like that. But I agree with you. I think that going back to your idea of maybe only certain distances or only certain wall types, like maybe it has to be a type of stone or you have to be justify it within the world somehow. But
Right.
give it some meaning other than I can arbitrarily shoot a rope in any general direction and then shimmy there, like Pocahontas and her. I mean, she does like one stroke when
Right.
she's halfway across that lake, and that's the same way. She's like, yanking on this rope, and she's like, all the way to the top of
Physics, what are they?
Big Ben.
General,
I was
Yeah,
gonna
yeah, it's
mention
hilarious.
that tends to emphasize the or the zip line mechanic in and of itself. So you're basically trying to justify the existence of that mechanic, which, by the way, is not a criticism. It's
Sure.
that's perfectly a valid way of making the game more interesting, and I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
If specifically your objective was to make the parkour more interesting, I would argue that's probably not the greatest method to go forward with. But like I said, video games, especially in the series, has always been flexible at changing the definition of them. Look at every single Nintendo game. So that's like I said, it's not a criticism at all. It's not, and I think it's a completely valid solution. But I would also argue that it also loses the parkour element as a consequence.
Which has kind of been a reliable tenet of that game. So like once you kind of, because you're right. I mean, it's totally valid to change the definition of what a game is and is not. But I think at the same time, if you have a player base that's used to a certain set of mechanics or even systems that they rely on to have fun in a specific way, then you're alienating that player base.
Yeah. It's effectively like a game, like an entire series being based on a specific character, whether it be a book, movie, television, whatever, based on a single character, and that's the entire conceit of the show. And then suddenly, one season, the main character's like number 2, or like put into the background. It's like that's effectively what you're doing.
Yeah, I
whenever you
mean, when Mulder left the show of The X-Files, no one watched The X-Files.
you can't. I watched like maybe one episode with the T-1000 as the main.
So sorry, I didn't
If
mean
only
to,
he were the T-1000.
I mean, come on, that'd be a
we're
great
getting off
show.
point. I see you here in the front. I saw this gentleman with the yellow.
I was thinking, for a grappling mechanic, if they added an element of risk to it, like if it maybe provide more exposure to you, more risk detection by guards, or if there's a chance it would fail while you're using it, like it might just fall.
Sure, yeah.
I love that.
I love that too, because early Assassin's Creed games, the parkour was dangerous. You could fall off the building, you could misstep and not grab a ledge. And it seems in later titles they've kind of put training wheels on the way you climb, and so suddenly it becomes about the coolness of climbing and not about the inherent risk of it, which I totally agree with that. I think it's a great idea. Yes.
So with the parkour being a rhythm game, mini game in its own right, make the zip line a mini, kind of like a mini game instead of a single button press. You have to time it just right, otherwise you might fall.
Yeah. I see. That's great, and that just adds back to that to the
Right.
point there too.
So it puts a risk in, like, you can't, let's say you can't move during that mini game, so now you have a risk of being detected.
Yeah. Right.
So that forces you to go through the parkour first before you even consider the zip line.
So we keep going back. Yes. Yeah.
I think it's showing more about the unwedding of like the setting and the story with the game mechanics. Like earlier in Assassin's Creed, you were doing the parkour and stuff because that was one of the only ways for you to traverse the town undetected. And now it's separating itself more from the story, and it's like, oh, you just need to get around faster because the place has gotten bigger.
Massive, yeah.
We've changed location.
Sure.
There's a bit of a dissonance there.
Other things that have teleportation and stuff fit in the game, like again, Nintendo Pokemon, you have a way to teleport from town to town by flying on your
Right.
Pokemon.
Right.
It still fits in universe, but it's still essentially a teleportation.
It's a convenience.
I'm waiting for the fly mechanic in Pokemon Go.
Use it right there. Oh.
Well, you can make it gravity-based. You can make it gravity-based. If scaling is such an important mechanic, you don't want to get rid of that. So what you should encourage the player to do is look for high points. And build the zip line, split the zip line from high to low.
Yeah, for sure.
Ooh, yeah.
Who brought up
So
Revelations?
realistic
Was it-
zip line.
Did that individual leave? Somebody brought up Revelations. Actually, in Revelations, they did implement this like zip line back and forth thing.
Yeah, I think he left, actually.
But it was totally gravity based. Like you couldn't really go back up the rope. You could only go down it, which is that's I totally think that's a valid. I agree. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm right.
You could limit the range of the zip line, so it allows you to jump the gap in the wider streets instead of otherwise making it allows you to keep your parkour flowing without bypassing the entire.
And that solves the problem. That solves the problem right there that they had because the reason why they implemented it in the first place is because the gaps were too wide.
Right. So I'm going to open the floor up to general games. We can keep talking about this particular instance because I do think it is an interesting kind of exercise to figure out how you take a game that's obviously very well established and how you might put your spin on it, right? So we can keep talking about that. But I also want people to feel comfortable to open up to other games you've played where maybe later iterations or patches or whatnot have implemented mechanics that maybe by accident have undercut core systems within the game. And I saw your hand first. Yeah.
Okay, so in the remake, I think it was MGS1 or MGS2, they had the ability to go, no, I'm sorry, it was MGS3. They added the extra camera, so instead of being top down, you could just move the camera like normal.
That was in the special edition.
Right. So you can just kind of like, once you get into level, just stand and like pop, pop, pop.
Yeah.
And you're
Well,
done.
because the game from the outset, the first three were designed with that fixed, like Kojima's view on things. You know, every level had, okay, this camera's going to be doing this movement this whole time, and it's like very fixed. And yeah, you're right. It's like the player could control it, but there was a very limited amount of control. Whereas I never got to play. Was it Subsistence? Yeah, I never got to play that, but from what I understand, that was the prototype camera for what they eventually went on to use in 4 and 5.
I have plenty of stories about starting off with Twin Snakes, and then all my Metal Gear fans were like, that was a bad place to start. Please don't start with that game, please.
Aw. Yeah, it's not terrible.
No, it's not like terrible, but the problem is that when you play Metal Gear 1, the original game, you can tell that all the levels were designed very specifically with the limited control set they had. When you play Twin Snakes, like all that falls apart immediately because they pull in all the Metal Gear Solid 2's mechanic into Metal Gear Solid 1.
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
it just looks really, really goofy.
Yeah, I can imagine. You
A
had a-
specific point in Twin Snakes is one of the mechanics that they brought in from Metal Gear Solid 2 was the ability to aim in the first person. In Metal Gear Solid 1, you couldn't get like headshots.
Yeah.
And the addition of headshots to Metal Gear Solid 1 completely changed the way you play the game and breaks multiple boss battles wide in half.
Yeah, I can imagine. Ocelot's battle is actually really difficult. This is I've tried playing Metal Gear Solid 1 on different emulators and stuff like that, particularly like the Android and whatnot, and to actually play it with anything other than a PlayStation or a remote that has button pressure sensitivity, because their mechanic of shooting is all dependent upon you barely pushing the button in Metal Gear Solid 1, and that would actually cause Snake to, aim, but he would only pivot in place, and that allowed you to actually, aim at stuff. And the actual boss fight with the first boss fight, I think it was with Ocelot, that is only possible if you can aim like that. Whereas now it sounds like, I've actually been very curious about that, like actually playing Twin Snakes, but I've never had a GameCube, so it's been one of those.
It's actually a very easy fight in that game.
You just shoot them in the head twice and it's like over.
Right. It's
So it's like they just kept everything the exact same, and they just added first person.
Yeah.
It had first person. Like Metal Gear Solid 1 had first person, you just couldn't shoot in that thing.
Shoot. It was the shooting from first person in Metal Gear Solid 1.
Yeah,
right.
It changed it.
that's awesome. I actually, here, you got an idea. Yeah.
So talking about your original question, in the series Monster Hunter, I started from like the first one, and a lot of that gameplay style is kill off bunches, but it's also about going on the gathering machines, roasting your own steaks, gathering the herbs you need, the honey you need, all doing it yourself, going out, taking that, crafting it, and using that as your kit to go out and fight these giant monsters. That downtime and then the uptime in massive battles. As the gameplay systems and as the games have progressed, it has gotten a lot of that to be automated. A lot of so you go to the chef and the chef will roast it for you. You go to the farm will give you the honey.
So it's like taking away.
So a lot of that downtime now is gone, and you actually have people that are upset, like where's my relaxing downtime? I don't feel like a hunter anymore. I feel like a monster killer. Like I just go out and it's Monster Hunter. Of course.
So it's like by adding this, they've taken away from it, which is that's a really interesting. I actually had an example. I can't kind of hit me while we were talking a second ago, but Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go is an example of not adding a mechanic, but taking away from an already pared down set of mechanics. Pokemon Go, as you guys know, was amazing when it started, but now look at that user base. Pokemon Go started off, and Pokemon in general is known for like 5 mechanics. Pokemon has 5 solid mechanics it does in every game. You got the discovery, catching, battling Pokemons, the level progression, and trading. That is core tenets. There's other stuff, plenty of other stuff like flying, fishing, going on your bicycle, running into that bug catching kid who never has a chance against you, and those are the core. And when they came out with Pokemon Go, they had like what, 3? They had like 2? No. They had about 3. Discovery, but that's really just you walking around. So it was like that's a built-in mechanic right there. You had catching, sure, and you had a vague form of battling with the gyms. So you got 3 right there. Oh, and you had level progression, but not the same level progression you would have normally had. That level progression is really a sub It's a sub-mechanic of the catching because, that's how you get your points. No trading. All right, so now we're already at we're at 4, but it's really just 3. We're at 3 here. And then they make a they make that patch and I understand what was happening. Their servers were slowing down to a crawl because for some reason they programmed this terribly. And you couldn't find Pokemon, in general, just nothing. Every single Pokemon out there was at the same distance. So in a matter of weeks, they were just hemorrhaging users, and now they're at the state they are today, which has, it's like a fraction of what they originally had within the, first weeks of their release. If that didn't happen, Pokemon Go, I believe, would still be like a juggernaut right now. You'd still have people playing that, but because in the first few weeks of it, they just dropped the ball and didn't talk to their users.
So it sounds like we could probably draw a comparison between Monster Hunter and the paring down here.
And that's I was taking a long way around to it.
Okay. Just to say that there is a rhythm to these games, and by maybe setting them at the same distance or not being able to explore as much, what you're basically doing is robbing the player of the ability to just breathe in between these moments of excitement.
Yeah, it's like you don't have time. It's like, well, okay, where can I find these things? It's like, well, what's this? That's not downtime. You're perpetually caught in this loop of, well, okay, can I find something? Is that going to happen?
And most games are built so that they have multiple systems that complement each other. Like Mass Effect, for example, if that were just a third-person shooter game, sure, it would be fun, but it would be very repetitive. I mean, part of the reason why people love that game so much is because in between murdering, tons of geth, you get to go talk to your squad mates and form a relationship with them. And so it's like that moment of like peace or reflection kind of builds. That kind of amplifies the combat.
Yeah.
It makes the combat more fun because then it's like, that person I love over there is getting shot at. I need to kill this, my enemies for that reason.
It's like a sign graph, to be honest. It's like you have the up times of excitement and then you have the down times.
Since you were talking about being invested in the characters around you, they kind of did that with the Phantom Pain. You had to recruit soldiers for your base, and they would only stay with you if they were invested in you. Otherwise, they would leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only way you could build your base up is if you kept the people around who were skilled enough to do the things you needed.
Huh.
Yeah. It's like, I liked that mechanic. That was a cool, interesting mechanic. They just didn't do enough with that, to be honest. It was a cool addition, don't get me wrong, but it was like they added it, and it was like, but the Phantom Pain could be a panel all its own. Like, just all the stuff that could have been in that game. Like, I had a long conversation. Oh, I loved it, don't get me wrong, but I also hated it. Like, it is the most confusing relationship I've ever had with a game, because at the end of it, I'm like, that was... Yeah. Yeah. It was like, well, you don't call something Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 when there's only 2 chapters.
There's a person back there who had their hand up for a really long time.
Yeah, this individual here, you're with the yellow.
Oh, I think he's
Oh, sorry. I think we've all been spotting. We see all of you, and we want everyone to be able to have an opportunity to share your ideas. So, who are you?
Someone wearing both the yellow on one sleeve and then red on the other sleeve, right there.
Okay.
Oh, he's talking to me.
The pairing of some of the older PS2 games, God of War, the original, for example, between the camera and the direction you have to push on the stick to walk. And so my character is walking straight down a beam. So I conceptually want to push in a direction that the beam is going and walk.
Right.
But the camera linking causes you to have to very subtly turn your stick as you're going. And that almost made me quit the game.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that wasn't. There's an entire generation of. It wasn't like it was. People complained mostly about the survival horror games. But it was like a lot of like. There was an entire generation of games where it was like your part. One of the mechanics was battling the camera. Like you had to fight the camera, and it's like it's kind of wild that it took developers an entire. It took them several years just to get over that idea.
Yeah, you really have to forgive the player their inability to perceive the depth of a locked camera. Like that has been a source of frequent frustration for me, no
Yeah.
doubt about it. So I don't want to stop this conversation, but we are close to time. So if you need to get going, or you've been holding it in, you need to go pee, or you're just hungry, feel free to go ahead and do your own thing. We're going to continue this conversation to the end of the hour. But for those of you who do need to go, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it.
You guys are amazing.
Yeah, thank you guys. No, thank you. Yeah, for sure. But anyway, feel free to stick around because we're going to be here, and we'd love to continue this conversation with you. So,
We'll be here all weekend. Not right here. We're going to be walking around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking about the mechanics that underline core tenets of the video game. I don't suppose any of you are familiar with the original version of Ninja Gaiden 3, huh?
No, but I'm like that's a great series.
Didn't they very recent? Not recently, but did they remaster that game or somehow reframe it?
They released I guess you could say, kind of like an enhanced.
Yeah, that's what I remember hearing.
That was still kind of a mess, but that's
Sure.
subject.
Okay.
The original game was that if you're familiar with Ninja Gaiden Black and Ninja Gaiden 2, you had things like healing, multiple save points within a level, different types of weapons. The weapons all had different levels, different strengths and weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera. Ninja Gaiden 3, one weapon, no upgrades. The only way to heal was doing Ninpo, and the Ninpo bar was almost as large as the health bar. Steel Bone was kind of cool and broken, especially once they released the site, because if you activated it once, you could just literally keep going forever, so long as there was enemies.
Huh.
And for those unfamiliar, the Steel and Bone tactic was basically it was weird how activating the Ninja Gaiden in the original Ninja Gaiden 3, but if you hit an enemy a certain way, then the weapon would basically get caught on them. You had to press the button again, and it would just tear through them.
Ooh.
Of course.
My words don't do it justice. It's actually kind of awesome.
Sure.
So long as you're a fan of Mortal Kombat and whatnot, it does get kind of gruesome.
Right.
But with the sight, the way Hayabusa holds it, he holds it at the end and it spins. So long as there was enemies on battlefield, he could just keep spinning like that. You walk into it, it's literally just ripping.
Yeah. So would you say that undercut the more strategic, challenging aspects of the combat? Like, did it turn it from something that was more of a strategic combat game to something that was more of a hack and slash, or?
In that particular instance, yes. And
Yeah.
of course, there was the other stuff that I brought up that
Sure.
it felt a lot more generic rather than
Like they took a few steps back, maybe.
Something like that.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was kind of a bad game for a multitude of reasons.
Right.
It was one of those situations where it wasn't really a bad game. Again, I'm stretching it in this case, but it was a bad Ninja Gaiden game.
Gotcha.
Okay.
As far as
So like the bar, like in your the bar's set pretty high for a Ninja Gaiden game, but for for a Ninja Gaiden game, it was pretty bad. But that still makes it pretty higher than a normal game. Is what you're saying?
kind of.
Yeah.
A better example in that case would probably be SSX 2012, let's say SSX 3, the game before it. Or SSX 2012, great snowboarding game, terrible SSX game.
Right.
A lot of the mechanics and charm and stuff was just gone. It was like I guess Speed is the best comparison I can
Okay.
to in recent time.
So it became less arcadey, perhaps?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about Metal Gear Solid 5. It's not a great Metal Gear Solid game, but man, does that have more content and anything than any game I've played in a long time.
Not to be rude, but I did have one comment in regards to Monster Hunter, since that brought up. And since you're bringing up Ninja Gaiden, I'll have to loop that in somehow as well. We talked about mastery earlier at some point, but it's always interesting to see how certain games implement mastery in different ways. Ninja Gaiden, for example, I feel like the mastery about that is understanding where the enemy placements are, which requires a lot of trial and error, by the way. Like if you play the first iterations of Ninja Gaiden, whether it's still in 2D, you don't know where the enemies are, you play through them and you get completely mauled. You're like, all right, now I know where they are, what they do, I need to plan this out, right? So the mastery in that game involves literal trial and error, but also with that planning process in the middle. Now that you have these new information, how can I do this level over again such that I can actually be this awesome ninja? Monster Hunter always strikes me as more about mind you, there are a couple of moments where you have like a lot of trial and error, but a lot of times like you can just kind of carefully observe what the monster does and be able to start planning traps, be able to start planning what kind of resources that you need. So like that game, when the mastery in that game is about gathering as much information as you can and coming in prepared to be able to fight it off, whereas Ninja Gaiden, like I said, is a whole lot of trial and error. So it's kind of an interesting observation to see like how mastery is implemented in both of these series and how each of them would undermine each other in their own series with all these benefits that really undermines that experience.
So next question, let's go way in the back. We haven't been able to touch a lot of you guys back there. Is it plaid? It looks plaid from here. Pretty sure it's plaid. All right. Thank you, sir. No problem. Frustration. No, yeah. No. And I love that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that was, I think for the sake of user experience, I didn't understand that was like a level of, I wanted to hit upon this a second ago when we were talking about fighting the camera, but in my opinion, I think that's actually one of the things, one of the great things about the old school survival horror games. Mm-hmm. What survival horror has become, now they've shied away from it recently, but for a while there, I'm talking like the mid-2000s, survival horror was kind of synonymous with basically an empowerment fantasy. You got bigger and bigger guns and rockets and, all that garbage, and you weren't actually scared of anything by the time you got midway through the game. It became a regular game. A great game is something like Amnesia. It's depowerment. You can't do anything. Alien Isolation. That's one of the biggest mainstream games that takes that concept and just, you don't have a whole lot you can do. You have a flamethrower, sure, and you can like throw Molotovs, but eventually the alien will get wise and it'll start, it'll just power through those. So it's like that idea, the fact that you're depowering the player and making them go through stuff, like, and then turning it, bringing that to a meta level and making it so that they're fighting the controls themselves just to do something. That's cool, and it's like, where do you find that balance between, okay, this was coded horribly and doesn't really play that well, or this was intentional, they're trying to mess with you.
Yeah, and I would say that the distinction there, especially with modern gamers, you can't just make a crappy traversal system and then say that that's a justified choice. I mean, you can, but people aren't going to buy that anymore, right? Like,
right.
Back then, that was kind of to be expected because more often than not, games had those challenges.
Yeah.
But because the refinement of the game development process and because gamers are so much more savvy now to how a good system feels, to me, like if you were going to have something in the world, you would need to justify it within the world. So
it's a trope called interface screw, and you would have to kind of lampshade that is happening. You would have to basically be like, hey, in order for people to get it, I feel like, I don't know, it may be underestimating the audience, whoever, like the audience, the player, whoever's playing a game, it may be underestimating them, but you would need to lampshade that, hey, this is a thing that's happening. Whether,
of course.
Yeah, that this is intentional.
You can break the main player's leg, you can, cover them in glue or, whatever fits the context of the game.
Well, no, yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, GTA does a great job of making you drunk and then driving like a maniac. I don't know why, but I am particularly fond of getting wasted in that game and then just trying to drive.
It's a mini game in and of itself. That's a game in and of itself.
I just want everyone to know who is maybe here now or watching at home at some point that is not something I enjoy in real life.
No, I'm gonna take that quote out of context.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I've messed around with that idea in one of my prototypes. I took a shader. It was in Unity. I found a shader that mimics PlayStation. It mimics PlayStation 1 style graphics. You can find it out there. It's free to use. If you guys want to try this, it's actually kind of fun. It's interesting. You kind of have to mess with it.
I think what he means more,
but But no, like,
You
I'm
mean, like,
getting
the
to that.
control- okay.
No, I'm getting to that. It's like, what would come with that? If you wanted to make like a survival horror game that's like, and pretend like it was like made on the PlayStation, you have to put in a terrible camera. You can't not put in a horrible camera, because that evokes 90s horror games, period. You have to have a terrible camera because battling the camera is a mechanic all of its own. And it's like, I still love that. It's awesome.
It's important to note that because mechanics are something, basically the rules that you have to deal with, they often tend to be timeless, right? If the first time you're playing Silent Hill and you're thinking, "Wow, the controls are terrible and it's making me terrified," that feeling is not going to change for some new kid that's playing around the blocks. Sure, they'll complain about how horrible the graphics are because the standard of graphics has obviously improved. They may complain about how repetitive some sound effects are, and probably realize that a lot of sound in the game is actually just background music running in, because gamers today are really savvy about that. But when it comes to controls, that will still continue to remain very convincing, and it's probably one of the secrets of making video games a timeless classic. So I would argue, yeah, there's definitely space for that, because as far as I can tell, it's not something that it's not something that technology is going to make quote unquote better, in the sense that that same experience is going to remain no matter how long. Assuming some sort of emulation that can recreate that experience exists, that it's still going to stay that way, and it's still going to recapture that very same feeling to new players.
You have a point. And then we're going to bounce backwards. We'll go from to yellow lanyard to blue plaid to yellow. Right. Well, we're right at time, so we might get kicked out, but I want to hear everyone's thoughts. So we're going to do our best to hear everybody. So we'll just try to keep it as quick as possible.
Everybody talk at the same time.
It is literally the same Resident Evil style, like fixed camera perspective. But when you want to fight something, you have to go into this funky ass first person view. The only time you can hurt your enemies is when it's very limited. You have a set amount of actual resources in that game. The only way to damage things is to stare at these terrifying monsters. And the longer you stare at them, the more damage you do. But you don't want to look at them because they're horrifying.
Sure.
Yeah.
To me, that's always been like the best balance.
And justified, right? Because you're like, oh god, you don't want to, but
It's a catch-22 just to fight them, and that's the best way.
You don't need a cutscene, and you don't need like a voiceover for that. It just makes sense because, of course, you're freaked out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, to bring up Dark Souls games, I think there's a lot Dark Souls 1 changed all the way to Dark Souls 3, is the warping mechanic. Bonfires. And 3, oh my god, there's way too many bonfires, and it eliminates a lot of the risk and the danger of the world. A world that does not give a shit about.
Right.
You can, in Dark Souls 3, were Blighttown to be a thing, it would be nowhere near the monster that is known. And for those of you who aren't aware of Blighttown, it's the moment in the game where you stop going up and out control, you're going straight down through just a dilapidated, horrible town with just tiny platforms. It was never.
Sounds like my hometown.
It's
I'm joking.
in every single way possible. There's things that are native there. They're attacking you from the dark.
Wow.
There's just awful, narrow passageways you have to go through. You have to go across bottomless pits frequently.
Status effects.
And the only hope is off in this distance is you
Right.
see the dim glow of this bonfire. Just way out there. You're like, there's hope to be had.
Sure.
But it's way out there with this awful chasm from it.
Yeah.
It's like Bane. It was like so close.
And if you screwed up, back to the beginning. And
once
in
you're
Dark
down
Souls 3, so in 1, there was, eventually you got an item that allowed you to warp and bonfires.
Okay.
Out of necessity, because everything was really far away from each
Mm.
other. But everything local to that, before you got that, was very cleverly designed and interlocked. So that way, you could go seamlessly from one area to the other and wrap back around and continue adventuring in this world and exploring. And then in 3, the ability to warp between bonfires immediately,
Mm.
right away, and making there be a lot of them.
Right.
So you
They made it
So
easier, it
it's-
sounds
so
like.
there's a lot more safety
right.
Huh.
in this game that takes away a lot of the risk of entering these areas.
Gotcha.
And some of the, I guess, the enjoyment of beating that challenge.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
And I found
And
these
again, it's very much a world that wants to be challenging, that wants to
Right.
remind you that it is not friendly to you.
Mm.
Right.
I felt like you don't really get a good mental map of the area in Dark Souls 2 and 3 because you can warp anywhere. You don't have to figure out, like, okay, how do I get from the Undead Bird to the Deaths to Blight Town?
Interesting.
To Valley Drakes. Like, you don't get a mental map and you can just warp everywhere because you're not, you go there once and then you never, like, backtrack through it again.
Right.
You just warp and then you don't, I can't remember the layouts of those levels in Dark Souls 2 and 3 because you just warp everywhere.
Mm.
So, and like Dark Souls 1 is like you said, seamless. Like all the loading time is masked by corridors and like transitions and stuff and like trees.
That's clever.
All the loading time is perfectly masked. There's like no loading basically, or that you can see. But when you warp, of course, it has to load
Sure.
the area.
Mm.
So you're not warping for the entire first half of the long-ass game.
So you're just cutting sections out of this game.
It feels like there's no loading in here.
Gotcha.
But when you're warping everywhere in Dark Souls 2 and 3, there's tons of loading.
Right.
You have to load every time you want to go somewhere.
It feels like a step backwards.
So you
But-
friend in the yellow lanyard there.
So just the adding features that kind of take away from stuff. So for Assassin's Creed 2,
Uh-huh.
they introduced the gun. And
Yes.
the gun, it takes a while to aim.
Right.
It's really loud.
Yeah.
And it's a limited resource. And then in Brotherhood,
Mm.
you get a crossbow.
Yeah.
And the crossbow
And it's silent.
is pretty
Right.
broken.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
really easy to aim.
Sure.
It's not loud, and you got a lot of ammo for it.
Yeah.
It kind of ruins a lot of the stuff that's in
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. That's a very good observation. Thank you. Yes.
I played the first Assassin's Creed for the first time a few weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
Beat it. I really enjoyed the parkour mechanics,
Mhm.
but I felt like combat just really took away from that.
Yeah.
Because it was so easy, specifically
Huh.
the fact that enemies could only attack you two at a time.
Right.
The fact that you could just counter an enemy attack that was made against you and one hit kill most opponents.
Uh-huh.
The
Yeah.
amount of health you had, I never felt afraid of walking into a crowd of
Sure.
enemies and just taking them all out. I was never incentivized to try to, take advantage of any of these stealth mechanics and try to not run away.
Yeah.
I just felt like I could just tank any group of enemies.
Right.
And that really defined the experience of the game.
Do you think that something that might have made it more challenging is the fact that maybe multiple people would attack you at once, or that it's probably would be harder to fend off groups of people like once you start to get like 2, 3, 4 people?
Yeah, or even just simply adding like a hard mode or something.
Sure. Right.
Like, it's just, I never felt like I needed to master any of the other
Yeah.
Mm.
I could just casually kill anyone I wanted.
Yeah.
Jean
By the
Jacket.
way, I always feel like whenever a game or movie, for that matter, adds in what feels like an obligatory combat section, my heart weeps. It is so transparent that they didn't want to add this in, and
Yeah.
it's terrible.
It makes movie long and boring.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so, no specific game, but something I feel that's maybe a lot of stuff unnecessarily is, so any kind of like third-person action game where you can see important objects in the wall or you can through walls. I really hate this. I try
You
not
do?
to do as much as possible, so,
You see, like, seeing through walls?
yeah, like, so Tomb Raider, Hitman.
Yeah. Tomb Raider's got their legs.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I really, Batman.
Yeah. But his is kind of his is justified. Got the detective vision.
It's also smart and you notice like little
Right.
things. And in Arkham Knight, you notice like minuscule stuff. And I'm talking about like just general key objects and enemies. Like I really hate this.
Well, Arkham Knight has some problems.
I love
Yeah.
Arkham Knight. We can talk about that though.
It undermines the mechanics looking at the game world. You don't have to do that. Just
Right.
low render version. Oh, there's everything you can see.
Sure. This gentleman back here in the black jacket.
Let's see, so I would say Deus Ex Human Revolution.
Uh-huh.
You can pretty much either go full stealth or
Uh-huh.
just guns blazing. But if you go full stealth, you're going well until you reach the boss battle.
Right. Yeah.
They force you to go. Yeah, that's like a problem with most stealth games. They don't know how to do just a full-blown boss battle without turning it into a giant battle.
Yeah.
Like Metal Gear Solid, most of those. I mean, there's like maybe one or two that that doesn't allow you to do stealth. All of them are pretty much, hey, you and I, one-on-one, this is happening.
By the way,
Yeah, the director's cut re-implemented stealth paths. If you stealth paths, basically it allowed you to hack computers and let other things kill the boss. Which I never finished Deus Ex 1. Please don't shame me. So I don't know how they handle the stealth in the boss battles, but I'm under the impression that at least for some of them you can talk your way out of them.
Well, no, well, I mean, yes, for some, but Dark Souls 1, like, you can basically get past everything. Like, you don't have to kill anyone. Like,
Right.
Ever. Like,
Sure.
no bosses, you don't have to kill anyone. And you can basically sneak past them. Or sometimes you have to just run past them, and it's hilarious. You just fucking hook it.
Right.
You just leave.
Nice.
And
Sure.
You just leave the place, because it's like, there's nothing stopping you from leaving.
Right.
The game, like, sets it up so, like, you're supposed to kill this guy, but it's like, you can just leave.
Right.
Like,
Which is
there's
cool.
no consequence.
Yeah.
By
And
the way-
as long as that's considered by the developers as like an intended choice and consequence, then that's great. I mean, obviously, there are other games where that's not the case, and you can just run through a level without any consequence, and that's just an oversight.
You're talking about Human Revolution, right? And so if memory serves correct, the boss battles were actually implemented by an outsourced company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like it literally was not
Yeah, they
part
got
of the
stuff.
design. So you're absolutely 100% right there.
Y'all, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate the extended conversation here. If
Yeah, I
you
wanna
do want to
keep
come up and
talking,
chat,
yeah.
we're going to be taking down, but we got to make room for the next panel in here. So thank you guys again.